Little known fact, in my earlier years, I was convinced I was going to become a teacher. I taught college for a little while. I eventually when we moved here, I even taught 7th and 8th grade in Central Dauphin. I taught Latin for a few years, which was a real challenge. So this is fun. This is sort of like back in the classroom where it all started. I never thought I would ever run for mayor. So, and I never took a leadership Harrisburg course, and basically I was content to just sort of moving here back in the late 90s and starting a business from scratch, doing some teaching. It was really the extraordinary financial circumstances that Harrisburg found itself in that sort of made me feel like I had a call to action. And it's good to see so many faces this morning, because I know that all of you clearly feel the same way about Harrisburg and the region, and you want to be involved, and that's great. But I guess the point of my anecdote was that it can happen at different times for different people. It's not something that I ever really sought out. It's something that sort of developed around me. As some of you may know, my wife and I own the Midtown Scholar Bookstore, which is a nice bookstore across from the Broad Street Market. We started out of our home back in 1999 after I had done some teaching for a little while. My wife was teaching at Messiah College. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually we moved to a smaller little store in Harrisburg, and then grew into the current location which we have now. But the process of starting a business in Harrisburg and creating a sort of community space, because at the center of our bookstore we have a stage, and we do a lot of programming, and we have lots of what I like to call sort of caffeinated conversations about the issues of the day. All of that really got me involved in thinking about what was going on in Harrisburg. And we had some of the more interesting initial conversations about the Harrisburg Authority, had panel discussions about that, about some of the spending that was going on, about whether or not to go into bankruptcy. The first receiver that was appointed for the city of Harrisburg came to the bookstore several times for outreach sessions, and this really got me completely connected and involved to the city. And basically, it came down to this. In a business, the sort of first priority, first and foremost, is creating a sort of stable financial environment so that your business can be successful, and so that you can hire as many people as possible, and you can grow over time for sure, and you can make a difference. But if you don't have a business plan that's going to financially work, you're not going to be in business for long. And the city basically had stopped paying its bills and owed millions and millions of dollars that it had amassed over many years, but everything sort of came due at once. This is now back in 2007. And the reaction at the time from City Council was, well, we'll just declare bankruptcy, and that'll be that. Somehow all the debts would disappear. And municipal debt is a little bit different than personal debt or corporate debt, because these debts had been accrued every time the city sort of voting and pledging the full faith and credit of the city of Harrisburg. Every single time, saying that we would pay it back and we would use our taxing authority if we had to. We made these representations over and over again. As well as the fact that it was unlikely that suddenly the creditors were going to go away, that the state stepped in and said they were not going to have the capital city of Harrisburg go bankrupt and stop paying its bills. It's an amazing amount of money that the city of Harrisburg accrued. It was almost $800 million worth of debt for a tiny, impoverished city. As you know, Harrisburg, the region is large, but the city itself is relatively narrow. The majority of the property is taken up by state government and other nonprofits, don't contribute to the tax base. The average Harrisburg citizen lives either right at or slightly below the poverty line. Not a lot of wealth in the city of Harrisburg, especially to pay back hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. So as a business owner and somebody who wanted to continue to attract people to the city, I saw things sort of falling apart, and I threw my hat in the ring, ran for office. Again, didn't really expect that to be at all something I was thinking until basically about 2007. And over the past year, I am pleased to say that we actually did something rather remarkable in the city's history. We balanced the budget, and we spent less money than we took in, which sounds sort of shocking. Yes. You are business leaders, and you understand the importance of this, and it seems pretty basic, but it's not really. You know, in the past, when we had adopted a budget, it was customary to spend every dollar of what was adopted. And we instituted a policy that said, look, just because it's in the budget doesn't mean that you need to spend it. And we did some other things where we held off on making hires over the course of the year to try and build up a little bit of a buffer. And at any rate, we ended up spending 70% in some departments of what we could have spent, 80% in some departments, so that by the end of the year, we'd actually spent significantly less and had a little bit of a fund balance. Just a small nest egg for the city, but something that we could really build on. As a part of that, we also paid all of our bills, and we paid them all on time, which just hadn't happened. And not all the credit goes to me or city leadership or management. A fair bit of the credit goes to the complicated transaction that was put in place before I took office, which involves a couple of, I'm sure, your favorite subjects. It involves parking, it involves sanitation and trash and the incinerator. But Harrisburg basically, the receiver and the state government basically looked at Harrisburg and said, there is one particularly valuable asset that the city has, and that is its parking system. It doesn't have a tremendous amount of debt associated with it, and you've got all of state government coming in to park. You've got potential income coming into those garages for years and years. Let's trade the parking system in exchange for $500 million of that debt, just sort of wiping it out. And they did a transaction, which we are still working with today, which basically the state leased the parking garages, and they hired a private entity to run those parking garages. SP Plus, or Standard Parking, are probably the least popular people in all of central Pennsylvania. And they basically raised rates, as you know, and they increased enforcement, as you know, but in exchange for that, the city was able to wipe away hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. And yes?
Have you lost all negotiating powers with them?
No, and that's where this story is heading. So on the one hand, in some sort of general sense, yes, because you have people sort of coming up every day to the city and saying, got this ticket unfairly, or never coming back to Harrisburg, the customer service was so horrible, or the parking enforcement officers were sort of waiting by my car and gave me a ticket immediately. And on the one hand, the city would have to say, well, there's nothing really, we don't have any actual power because the enforcement comes from this private company which is working for a state agency. But on the other hand, we really do have an awful lot of, I would say, persuasive power. And leadership is not just about the sort of enumerated powers that you have, but it's how you sort of creatively problem solve to get things done and exert yourself in ways in which maybe you don't have explicit power. But my approach has been, so at any rate, all that was to say that you had a transaction that really had to be done. And the reason that we can pay the bills on time and that we can have a balanced budget is because we didn't have these big, huge, gigantic debt payments that were sort of beyond our control. Once we got rid of those and got those down to a manageable level, well, then the city could operate like a normal city. And we will never go into, at least as long as I'm there, we will never borrow to that extent again. We will never develop that type of debt again. But the trade-off was the parking, and another trade-off was selling the incinerator to Lancaster, which was a different a sort of municipal authority. And the city residents pay very, very high trash rates, much higher than you pay if you don't live in the city. And so those sort of two things. Now, trash rates paid by city residents, although they are something which are paid by everyone, including nonprofits, if you think about it. So it is a way of sort of taking the debt and spreading it out among every property holder in the city of Harrisburg, rather than just those that can afford it, or those that aren't tax exempt. And parking was a way of basically shifting the debt burden to commuters, and especially, and others who would come and come out of town. Yeah.
A question with the incinerator. Can you
Sure.
help me understand how another municipality can take it over and turn a profit, whereas why the city couldn't have done the same thing?
Right. So it was a municipal authority, which is a little bit different than a municipality. So it wasn't the city of Lancaster that was buying it. It was the Lancaster Solid Waste Authority. It had previously been owned by what was called the Harrisburg Authority, which was also a municipal authority. And the problem was that, much like the city, the finances on the incinerator worked except for the debt. So on a yearly basis, a lot of money came in and there was a surplus. The problem was that they borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars against the incinerator, and they couldn't pay the debt payments on it. So, and the reason well, it was just basically over mortgaged, and they never really had any hope of being able to pay down that debt. That is sort of the subject of a criminal investigation into how that much debt could have possibly accrued to something. So the incinerator sold for about $100 million, but it had almost $400 million worth of debt. So imagine if you had, a home that you borrowed $400,000 on, but it was clearly only worth $100,000. So something wrong there. So that is the dynamic that didn't work there. And we can talk more about that, but back to parking. So, we inherit the system. I inherit the system. I don't give the parking tickets out anymore. They are being enforced by this private company. And what happens? The company comes in, has terrible customer service. I mean, they are just the worst ambassadors you could possibly think for the city of Harrisburg. They really do hover. They're issuing extremely high tickets. And initially, when we start expressing concerns, the response is, well, look, we gotta, it's the first year, we're just getting started, and they really have very high revenue projections for what they're gonna bring in due to tickets and enforcement and everything else. At the same time, it's not just customer service, it is basically a very high rate. People are not used to paying for parking on Saturdays. And suddenly Harrisburg is charging $3 an hour in the downtown for Saturdays for what used to be free. So that's a big sort of cultural shift for folks. But what to do about it? So I basically, in working with the parking authority, and this was just sort of recently announced, basically said, look, last year you've got about a year's worth of parking revenue under your belt. You made your projections last year. If we can guarantee that the revenue stays the same for next year, can we experiment with the concept of rate elasticity, which is that basically, depending on the time of day or the location, maybe if you change the rates, more people will park. You could theoretically lower rate, you could see more people park. In other cities, sometimes parking can go through the roof because it goes up even higher and higher in times of demand, and it goes back and forth. I suggested in certain target areas, or at times, we simply lower the rate. We see if we get more people into park, and if we do that, then we can make those rate changes lower. So while we didn't have any power, they were open to an argument that was sort of financially based and that it guaranteed them sort of a baseline revenue. So they're willing to experiment within a level of a cushion of certainty, basically, that the city put up. And we took some money that we get every year from the county, from the hotel tax, which is money that people pay when they stay in a hotel like this. It's split up evenly, well, maybe not so evenly, but it's split up in the county, depending on which municipality you are. And it's supposed to be used to promote the city. So we took some of that money and we are using it to help promote people coming in and parking at different times. We also established a city-sponsored coupon code. Again, this is not something which was really anything that we could force them to do, but we said, let's establish a code for free parking. And do you all know, did you see that now on Saturdays, if you use the mobile app, you can, which is called Tango, which is really easy to download. If you type in LUVHBG, you can get 4 hours of free parking downtown. And we did that in a similar way where we're not actually, doesn't matter, we're not being billed by the number of people that use it. We're being billed by the amount of money that the parking system brings in on Saturdays versus what it brought in last Saturday. So theoretically, you bring more people in on Saturdays, and some of them are paying to park, or some of them are staying beyond 4 hours, you can actually increase revenues on Saturday and still give people 3 hours worth of parking. Because we were at such a point where nobody was coming into the city at all. And what's an interesting fact is, Saturdays and the other extended time, 5 to 7, which we used to not charge for in the city, those periods we're not bringing in much revenue off the street from meters. It's about a little under $300,000 is what every Saturday for the whole month was bringing in total in on-street parking, plus the people that were coming in and parking at 5 to 7. So,
But you had to sell that asset to a premium to them and then run the analysis for them to make them realize what they should know as a business.
Yes, pretty
First
much.
part.
Yes.
And second,
Yes.
have you done analysis to the economic impact of the city or to the businesses in the downtown because of that sale of the asset?
Right, and the answer is yes, through the extent that I can as mayor, which is by speaking to business owners and getting more than just an anecdotal reflection, getting the numbers of people that sort of currently were parking, and you could see that declining. The thing about the transaction is that Standard Parking basically got a contract from the state to run it. They don't necessarily, believe it or not, under that system, they don't really have an incentive to be good at customer service or, write fewer tickets or do anything along those lines, which is one of the trade-offs if you take a public asset and you privatize it. You sort of remove it from the realm of public influence and control, and you put it in private hands where they don't have an incentive necessarily to do anything. So in order to combat that, you basically have to make the case for them, do the work for them, and argue in terms that they can understand, which is that, maybe you can. Basically, the system is so unhealthy at the moment that you're going to be at a point where you work yourself out of business. Why not try and turn it around now and save it and improve it? And they got that. They just weren't able to innovate. It's not something, especially in the complicated world of working for a state agency and having to make certain bond payments and whatever, and having no sort of intermediary that really was focused on liaisoning with the public. So,
In the negotiation
yeah.
and stuff of that contract, what happens if they are not able to meet the profit projections that they have? And they are able to sell. Does the city have any ability to be able to be involved in that future sale?
They wouldn't sell, and basically the way the transaction is set up is that in order to finance it, they had to do a bond transaction, which they issued bonds for the parking system. Those bonds are paid off first from the income that comes in. And then whatever income is left over after you pay off the bonds goes to the city, goes to Standard Parking, goes to capital improvements, goes to all these other things. There are enough people, when you think about it in Harrisburg, there are enough people parking in the garages, commuters, that are paying a monthly parking rate to cover the bond payments. It's really what they call the waterfall payments, the money that would come to the city or elsewhere that is in jeopardy if no one's parking on the street or the enforcement isn't really there. So what was happening is we got to this year, and the bond payments were being met, just as they were met last year, but no additional money was passing through or trickling down to the city. And the city does have a vested interest in having that happen. One of the interesting ways in which the transaction was set up is it was set up in such a way that the city would essentially profit share. So if the system was healthy and brought in a lot of money, it could mean millions of dollars for the city's budget. And we are sort of hoping for that and counting on that. It's in the budget. If we don't make it, we'll have to use some of our reserves to cover that. And that's why we knew in the first year we wanted to build up a little bit of a reserve. Imagine having a business and coming in and having no reserves, where you're sort of, not only you're behind on all your bills, but you're really sort of going paycheck, you're payroll to payroll, and you're not able to really have anything to draw on. So having a little bit of something to draw on as a cushion, we could do. But I inherited the parking system. I think it was a deal that had to be made for the long-term stability of the city. We never should have borrowed the money to begin with that got us in that position, but it sort of had to be done. And now the question is, how do you make the best out of that situation? And that's sort of the approach we're taking, and you can look at that. Let me tell you some other things that are happening in Harrisburg, some other highlights, other challenges. And then we can, and feel free just to raise your hand, and we'll go back and forth with questions, and I will leave time for questions at the end. Thought it was good to start with parking because it is the most important. So starting today, April 1st, and it's not April Fool's joke, so it's now $2 when you go downtown from 5 to 7 instead of 3. And starting this Saturday, you can use the Love Harrisburg code for 4 hours of free parking. A little something from the city. We're also trying to work with the businesses themselves and the business community, as a business owner myself, to sort of empower them to take a more active stake in the parking system. You do remember that when the narrative initially came out, all the stories were about how businesses were shutting down or closing, and how this was a negative impact. And I was one of the business owners who was saying, regardless of the reality of that on certain businesses, business owners have to sort of change that narrative and turn it into something positive, or it's just going to continue to snowball and not help anyone get more people, attract people down. So businesses themselves can offer coupons and can offer parking validation, everything through the system now, and not enough have taken advantage of doing that. And the city just hired a new business outreach person. And again, that was somebody that we would have liked to have hired last year, but we were very conservative in our hires. But we've gotten to the point where now we think with the cushion we can afford to pay for one more employee. And that person's going to be working with businesses to help them do joint marketing and everything else. We're not that great in terms of a community of businesses working together to promote themselves. We do have an improvement district in the city, a downtown improvement district, but it mostly focuses on beautification issues and things like that, which are important, not so much on sort of joint marketing of the city. That's something where the city can lead a little bit. So other interesting stories. Let me give you another interesting dilemma and let me get your opinion on how you would handle this. So tonight we have a public meeting of our planning commission, and they are considering a expansion project, a tower project, which would be the first new construction project in the city of really any great significance in several years. The reason for that is because of our tax structure, which is really, really high and penalizes new construction. This is a complicated concept, but I know that you all can get it. I have been trying to pass an economic development stimulus measure, which basically says if you do new construction in the city, we will not tax you on the value of that new construction right away. We'll do it over time. And we've put some interesting measures into that bill that have never been done anywhere in Pennsylvania, which is that basically for new commercial construction, for instance, you'll start out at a 50% reduction in your taxes over time, but it can grow to 100% depending on how many jobs you create. So if you create 10 or fewer jobs, maybe it'll be at 60%, but if you create 80 jobs, or you're going to bring in a lot of jobs in the city, it can be upwards of 90 or even 100%. We also put some requirements in a bill that if you take LRTA at all and you're doing construction in the city of Harrisburg, you have to hire city residents, and you have to hire a certain percentage of minority contractors as a part of what you're doing. Very interesting provisions that have never been in a sort of tax incentive bill before, but in an effort to make it appeal widely to the public and be something that could be really good. Basically, the way taxes work, and you know this, is especially school taxes, you're taxed on your value of what the property is that you own. When you do new construction, which can be very expensive to do, you're basically assessed at the value and the cost of that new construction. Whereas if you own a home, it's been here for a long time, you're taxed at the assessed value of the home. And Harrisburg, like a lot of places, the average assessed value of existing buildings is really quite low. The average assessed home in Harrisburg is $60,000. That's the assessed value of the home. So as a result, the assessed values are low, but the school district every year has to keep raising the millage rates higher and higher and higher to get enough money to do what it needs to do. And so the assessed values are low, the rates are high. When you do new construction, the assessed values are high and the rates are high, and it makes it really hard to do new construction in a place like the city of Harrisburg. Yes?
Are there any efforts, because there's a glut of office space in the city of Harrisburg, are there efforts to redevelop that rather than build a new construction?
Yeah, there are. Another interesting application tonight is from a major developer downtown Harristown, which is seeking to transform office space into residential space, which is, I think, a good idea for them. There are a lot of sort of older buildings with what we'll call, Class B or C office space, but would make really interesting residential condominiums or rental units for the city, which you see a lot more of. And you see that repeatedly in Harrisburg. There have been a couple projects, some high-profile projects like that in the last few years. The Lux condominiums, which are right across from the Capitol. That was an old office to residential conversion. In Midtown, there's a tall, old, abandoned building, the Furlow building, that was converted into residential, which had, previously been office. So, yeah.
What are there actual incentives? Like the incentives you just said for the new construction, that likely would steer somebody to build a new building.
Right.
But are there incentives to say, look, we got this boarded up building. I mean, if you look on 7th Street, there's a couple there that are very large buildings boarded up.
Yeah.
Is there incentives like that to address those buildings to shrink what's the availability to drive up rent rates? Because rent rates per square foot keep falling.
Right, and it's not just an incentive for new construction. It is an incentive for adaptive reuse of existing buildings too. In fact, it was even a higher incentive for we were privileging, in the bill, renovating an existing building. You get a higher rate for that over doing new construction. So yes, but they're very limited. How can, when you look at local government, what are the ways in which you can do that? You can do some sort of a financial incentive, a tax incentive, which is what we'd like to see. You can help publicize the building and try and bring people in, but there's a limit really to what you can do. And from a taxing standpoint, there is this this is called the LRTA, or the Local Economic Revitalization Targeted Assistance, which you can do legally in Pennsylvania. You can create such a program to do it, but you can't just spot reassess things or say this building here we're going to make possible for you to do cheaply, but we're not going to do that for everybody else. So we're trying to have a citywide program that would affect everyone equally, that would incentivize both new construction and rehab. And that would be rehab that could be either for an existing use or a new use. We also adopted a new zoning code too, which made it more possible in some respects for that type of conversion. Yes?
I didn't mean to interrupt your line in thinking about the construction, but kind of along those lines, what is your point of view on tax abatement for businesses coming into the city?
Yeah, and that is another issue that I'd like to see more of. Basically, we can have a tax incentive for startup businesses. We can produce. Harrisburg is a municipality that does have a business privileges tax, And Lancaster, for instance, doesn't. But we have the ability to do this. Its grandfather did. It's not a huge amount of money that businesses pay. Businesses also have to go through and get permits and a variety of other things. There are ways that we could reduce those costs and again, hopefully incentivize more businesses to come in, create more jobs, bring in other types of taxes like earned income taxes and things for all the employees that are coming into work. And it would be a net positive benefit for the city, and I'd like to do more of that. I'm all for it. I couldn't even get the LRTA through council because there is a philosophical difference of opinion regarding economic development, which is, and I think you have to understand this historically from the standpoint that Harrisburg is a poor city. It has been mismanaged for decades. It did almost go to bankruptcy. Everybody's paying higher parking. Everybody's paying high taxes. Everybody's paying high trash. People are not happy. And there's a general perception, I think, a sort of fear of outsiders coming in either with capital or with businesses. And this is just a local perception, but it's something we have to battle with. And there's resistance to this, and we can be our own worst enemy. And we need to, sort of turn that around through a variety of, I would say, through the example of good governance over a period of time, increased modeling of partnerships and goodwill. I ran on a campaign which said that the most important thing that we need to do is to come together as a community. We have a lot of pretty stark divides, and I think we're getting there.
Mayor, honestly, isn't that what we
Yeah.
need? We need some people to come in here with some capital and make some brews, make some changes.
Yes,
Same
we do.
changes that were made 30 years ago that got us to this problem.
We absolutely do. And if you go to the city of Harrisburg, we do. And we need it for our own residents as much as anybody else because we need jobs. And we need, if anybody would like to reduce taxes, and I'm all for reducing taxes, then we've got to increase the number of people that are paying taxes. You've got to increase the tax base. If you look at Harrisburg, the population since 1950 has basically been a steady decline due to suburbanization, and we have half the number of people that we did 50 years ago, which also means that we have the capacity to really grow and bring in more people into the city. And if we do more office to residential conversions and other types of things, we can have the housing stock. Bringing more people to come in and live in the city would increase the tax base and allow us to potentially do more types of targeted tax incentives or lower rates for everyone or do all sorts of things. And of course we need outside investment. Of course we need jobs. I'm just telling you I'm just giving you a little picture of the lay of the land and what we're up against. It's not a obvious conversation, especially when you're dealing with the very local level. And you're dealing with a sort of government situation in which, prior mayors really ran the city into the ground, and the current city council is just very, very leery of changes. So we've got to work to improve that. I'm committed to working to improve that, but you don't just come in and change decades of past behavior with these new suggestions. But I was giving you a moral dilemma here. So, and this is an economic development one, so maybe the answer will be obvious to you. Maybe the answer will not be obvious to everyone in the room. So, we have an application. It is to build a new office tower in the city of Harrisburg. And it is by PHFA, which is the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, which is down on Front Street in Harrisburg. And they have come with a proposal to build a gigantic, tall, gleaming, glass, beautiful in some respects, office tower in the downtown. And they are willing to preserve two structures in the immediate vicinity of that are brick and old and significant, but they want to tear down two wooden frame houses that have a long history in Harrisburg. Some of the oldest houses in the downtown, and they were built in pre-Civil War, and it's part of a little stretch there on Locust Street, which has an active sort of residential character in the midst of the downtown. And so the question is, should this agency that does pay taxes voluntarily, they pay a pilot to the city, even though they don't have to. It's a state agency, but they pay 100% pilot. So the building would generate, who knows, $100,000 a year in taxes. It would bring 100 new jobs to the city permanently. And they want to build it there because it connects to their current building. It's basically an expansion of their current building where they have parking and everything else. It does make some effort to preserve the character of the street, but it loses these two houses. And among other things, it's the first proposal to build something very large in the city of Harrisburg in a long time. So this was announced. There's a process, so it's not like the mayor says good or no. There's a process. There's a planning commission. There is a historic architecture review board, and there is a zoning board, all of which the developers have to go through, and there'll be the ability for the public to come out and say yes or no. And then there's this other thing at the end, which is that basically even if the architecture review board says no, it can go to, they can be appealed to city council, and city council can say yes anyway, and that happens a fair bit. So is this, do you think it's what would you do in this situation? Do you think it is an obvious win for the city? Do you think these are beautiful older frame houses?
What has city council said?
I can give you more details, but what's it?
What has city council?
City council hasn't said anything yet, so we don't know what they're going to say. The hearing is tonight. You had your hand up in fact, yeah.
Take a picture of them and put them in the museum. Knock them down.
Are there any?
No, I'm listening.
Are there any efforts to include the building materials from those structures into the new buildings in any way?
So on Locust Street, there's a big brick mansion that's going to be saved and incorporated in the structure, and then there's another brick mansion on it. But these are two little tiny, they're two-story. They're old. They're like 1850s.
So the materials from those homes, is there any way to implement them, commemoratively back into the new buildings?
I don't think so. I mean, good idea.
Can't make a false wall with one of them?
No, these would not really lend themselves for that because they're really, they're very small, wooden.
Make picture frames with them.
Make picture frames. I'm curious if that opinion is the complete opinion of everyone. And also, I wonder if anyone here lives in a historic house or in a historic street. I mean, for the neighbors there, they who buy a house and who live across the street, and they were on a street that had a sort of coherent it is a historic district. It had a coherent residential feel to it, and now you've got the office tower. Okay, yes?
Do people live in those houses now?
No. So what happened is, and I would say here's where the problem lies. For those that really wanted to preserve the houses, like the Historic Harrisburg Association and others, they were on the market for years, and nobody bought them, and they sort of fell apart, and then eventually they were purchased by PHFA. And if you speak to PHFA, they say, look, these houses were on the market for years, nobody wants to buy them, they're falling apart. We bought them, we're trying to do something positive for the neighborhood. I would say that maybe if the Historic Harrisburg Association had focused on marketing those houses and finding a buyer, there was an opportunity to do that, as opposed to now sort of after the fact, where they don't even own them, and now it's the worst thing ever. In other words, also, although the application is coming forward tonight, it has been known that they've needed to expand now for like 6, 7, 8 years, and they've been sort of moving towards this. So if not there, and not in this way, then maybe the obligation is to come up with an alternative place. Yes?
What's the impact on the city? Like, how large is this building? How many stories?
Very tall. They're requesting a variance to go above the height restrictions in the city. That's sort of a separate request. So it would be, not as tall as some of the buildings in the downtown, but taller than their current building, if you know where that is. And this is sort of near the River Street garage area behind there on Locust Street. So it is clearly tall and perhaps out of place for that block, but it's also, I disagree with a variety, and people can see architecture in different ways, but it it has some style to it. There's lots of glass. It's it would be a sort of iconic and attractive building. In a modern sense, though, yes.
Well, could it possibly, or how would it negatively impact the city's ability to service that with water, gas, whatever?
No, I think the city can do it. I mean, we have other high rises in that area, and the fire department has an action plan. So I don't think that would be an issue. It would be state of the art. It would be energy certified and have sprinklers and everything. So I don't think that would be the issue.
I vote yes.
So I would like to hear from somebody who does not agree with that position. Is there anybody who does not agree with that position? Really? All right. Well, okay. Well, all right. Yes.
I'll try to disagree. Any questions?
You should all come to the planning commission meeting tonight.
Were there,
Yeah.
for the two historic homes, are
Yeah.
there comparable, similar homes of that style and architecture, that time period, that are under the protection of the Historical Society or somewhere else?
Yes, and these are, I would call them vernacular houses, so they're not of any particularly great historic significance, but they're really old, lovely frame houses. There's just no question about it. And one of the charms of Harrisburg, and one of the charms of living in a historic city, is historic architecture and neighborhoods that have a sort of pedestrian scale. Are you going somewhere with that question?
Well, if there exists pretty much duplication of the same historical home architecture, and nobody's currently living this,
Yeah.
and the overriding benefits of what this building would bring, I mean, it lends itself toward allowing the project, but then you have to independently evaluate the project, the height of the building, and everything else.
Yeah.
But it seems to me there's a good case for using these
Right.
two homes for the purpose. Whether the purpose presented is exactly what you want, that's another
Yeah.
analysis.
Yeah. So, I agree. The height of the building and the look of the building, those are sort of separate issues. I think they're very much open for public impact. I think that people can weigh in. I think there could be good arguments for why it, should only be, 10 stories instead of 14 stories. I don't know if that's the case. Or why, zoning or the Architecture Review Board could come in and say, no, we want it to be stepped back a little bit. We want it to have more of a pedestrian scale right along Locust, but then it can be higher in the back, or something, something along the lines. Those are perfectly good. I'll tell you okay, yes.
You mentioned the tax base, it's going to bring jobs, it's going to bring construction.
It is.
And momentum to the city's, continuing.
And they are the only company, I want to stress this again, they're the only company willing to build a high-rise without a tax abatement or a tax incentive. So that is sort of significant in and of itself. There are no cranes in the city of Harrisburg, I keep saying this, and that is because of the cost. But they are financially able to do it, and they're sort of bursting at the seams in their current building. So I mean, you also, they haven't threatened to leave or anything like that, but if you have a successful entity in your city and they need to grow, do you assist them in helping to grow? Right. Yeah.
The question would be is you mentioned as a public agency they're not required to pay tax, but they do. They
pay a payment in lieu of taxes. That's right.
Is that something that you can build into the deal that you're gonna?
Yes, and I think they've already said that they would. Right. They pay it based on what their assessed value would be, what they would pay in taxes if they were taxed. They voluntarily pay, and that would be added to the agreement. So lots of positives. Yes.
Maybe you keep mentioning about tonight. Is tonight some official?
Tonight, I'm sorry. I'm trying to bring you cutting edge to the moment. The city of Harrisburg. There is a planning commission meeting tonight, and you're going to be able to, the parking changes are happening tonight. It's April 1st, so a lot of things are happening in the thing. Yeah. So you're going to read tomorrow. I guarantee you're going to read tomorrow in the paper about this contentious meeting in which throngs of people showed up and argued against the development of the building. So that's why we're sort of having an initial conversation. You will maybe be able to see that through our yes.
Previously, the statement was made, from a municipal perspective, one of the ways to raise money, one of the key ways is to raise taxes.
Yeah.
And my question for the residents of the city of Harrisburg is, doing this deal with PHFA going to result in Harrisburg not needing to raise taxes for the residents of the city?
Right, and it could result, first of all, Harrisburg can't raise taxes. We're sort of limited in what we can do due to the recovery plan for the city, which is good. Now, taxes were raised as a part of the recovery, and we're all paying for that now, but we can't actually raise it, and we wouldn't want to raise
For
it.
how
The question,
long? For how long is
as long as well, for 2 more years, is part of the initial recovery.
But after 2 years.
After 2
there's
years.
potential, if you don't have this revenue from this construction and this expansion here, that the residents could be faced with increased taxes.
It's an excellent argument, and the other part of that, which could be said, is that you could theoretically lower taxes. Again, taxes are generally too high in the city of Harrisburg, so if you had more buildings and more contributors to the tax structure, maybe you could lower it. We're paying our bills now. But we'd like to offer more incentives and lower taxes. In order to do that, we have to increase revenues, and so that is an example. I have tried to make that argument as well. That is a hard one to sort of think about longer term. It's much easier just, I think, to complain that taxes are too high, and and that's that. So I had an interesting suggestion for this dilemma, which I have proposed, which I think everyone will hate. And you know that you've got a good suggestion when everybody is. It's not good. You imagine the number of people that thought the parking coupon was a disaster or a bad suggestion too. So I suggested we move the frame buildings to an empty city lot down the street, which would still allow them to be preserved in their vernacular. So I don't think their exact location matters. Per se, there are other streets and other neighborhoods where buildings have fallen down and the city owns an empty lot, so to maybe move them. It actually is pretty expensive to demolish a building, and since these are wood and light, I think you could probably move them for the same cost of demolishing them. And then you have this positive story of, well, then you've taken an empty lot and you've moved a home, and then you could market it. You could use the redevelopment authority to do it. But that seems to please no one, I would say, because the neighborhood doesn't like that, because they still lose the historic feel of that particular block. And I don't think the developer particularly likes that, because it's another added expense, and then there's longer term liabilities about what's going to happen. But I think there could be a really interesting compromise. We'll see if that is proposed tonight. If that is proposed tonight, you'll know that it came from me. Yes, question. Yes.
I have a suggestion for today.
Yeah.
Those that are against your plan,
My plan. Well, don't call it my plan. All this stuff just gets put before the city, and you have to have an opinion if you are.
those that are against it should have to cough up the money that the pilot would otherwise bring to the city. So if there's 10 or 20 dissidents that are against the plan, they should have to kick in, $100,000.
Yeah, I don't know if that would be legal. It's it's not bad. I mean, they would argue, to defend the other position a little bit, and there is a position to defend, they would argue that Harrisburg's historic neighborhoods are sort of an intrinsic selling point to the city and have economic development value. And so why not build this building somewhere else, which doesn't require the demolition? And there are other lots. There aren't ones that are contiguous to, or where this building wants to be built. You do have to see there is a quality of life issue there, and but that's where zoning comes in too. Basically, the city for years had a very outdated zoning code, and there was no effort to really sort of define areas and neighborhoods as particular, as particularly residential or particularly commercial. Yes?
If the houses were to be moved, would they be refurbished or restored?
Yeah, so they're empty, but they were inhabited as recently as like 2011 or 12. So they, it's not like they've fallen into horrible disrepair. They're not blighted. They just somebody tried to sell them. Nobody wanted it. It's been empty. PHFA bought them. They're sort of connected into one. It's sort of two houses connected with a shared breezeway, and and it's framed, so you could lift it up and you could. Yeah.
I just wonder if there's any reason for moving it to another somewhat historic location, if there is historical significance, where they would be refurbished and could be used in tourism, like at Fort Hunter or at the Civil War Museum.
I think, what's interesting about these buildings is it's not that the buildings themselves are particularly significant because of the architecture they represent or who lived there. It's not like a mansion or a house of, where Abe Lincoln stayed when he visited Paris. It's not. But there is some value in a vernacular house. This is how the common Harrisburg resident lived prior to the Civil War. There are other examples of that in the city, for sure, but not that many. And so, they're sort of disappearing as time goes by, especially as people want bigger houses. They're very few. These are really relatively tiny. So all I can say is, and we're wrapping up here, that you should watch the news and you should follow how that is covered and how it develops.
How many unions will you have to deal with?
Well, the unions would be in favor of the construction because they will be in favor of the jobs both on the construction side and on the other side. So I don't think, this is not a union issue. This is more of a resident versus state agency versus development, all the things together, mixed up in one. Yes?
Is there any opportunity or changes that are going to happen with the diocese and the Bishop McDevitt School?
Yeah, that is a good question. I was supportive of the proposal last year to bring a charter school into that location. That was voted down by the school district, and there is not all charters are created equal. I'm aware of that, but we need a measure of educational choice in Harrisburg, and we don't have any choice when it comes to high school. We don't have a K through 12 charter. We have some individual charters that do well in the city. There was a proposal to do a full-fledged charter there that might have been great. They had a contract with Bishop McDevitt. Probably would have been the highest and best use of the building, keeping it as a school. But that was squashed and that is empty. But I think there'll probably be additional opportunities or applications for that. So, watch that. Yes?
Can you talk about some of the new businesses that have come into Harrisburg? And we have a lot of people here from outside of Harrisburg.
Okay. Yes, let me give you a couple really neat ones. I was at the Millworks in Harrisburg yesterday. Have you heard of the Millworks? Millworks is fabulous. It is located next to the Broad Street Market. It has artist studios and shopping and a centralized checkout, but it also is a farm-to-table restaurant with live music and a beautiful brick oven. It's fabulous. It's open for dinners and it's open for brunch. On the weekends, but not for lunch. You should check out the Millworks. If you like pizza, some of the more exciting pizza in Harrisburg can be found at the new little Cork and Fork, which is very small, but cute, right there on State Street and 2nd Street. I like the pistachio pizza. Pistachio pizza is excellent, and other things. If you like steak, and you want a really good steak, you can go to the Hilton, which is completely renovated its restaurant there and has an amazing new steakhouse. Those have all happened in the last several months. You're seeing a lot of interest in businesses coming into the city. I think we could do more, but for every business that has shut down or left, a new one seems to be coming in and opening, and that's exciting. Yes.
If I'm correct, that Harrisburg was selected as a cities of service, is that something that you see to increase volunteerism into the city to help with things like the sustainability of parks and blighted areas?
Those are excellent questions, and that is exactly correct. And we have a big day of service, day of caring coming up here, and we have launched a new sort of Adopt a Park program after some false starts and trying to put together the sort of legal documents that protect the city against liability. You can't necessarily have volunteer groups fixing playground equipment or that sort of thing. But
Did you get like, similar grants that other cities have gotten for being a city of service?
Yeah,
that might hire somebody to be in that position?
I would be totally open to hiring more people and getting more grants. So if you have a good one that I should apply for, let us know. But yeah, we're working on that, and services is very important, and we do, I have my office, the mayor's office tends to sort of focus on coordinating some of that, trying to make it easier for groups. We've done some other little service-related things. The city put aside some money to at least pay for the disposal of cleanups and things like that we didn't have in the past. In the past, you might have a service day, everybody would fill a dumpster of trash, and then, the city would have to pay for it and dispose it because we pay $190 a ton for our trash, and there's no money in the budget to do that, which caused tension with every time there was an attempt at a cleanup. So we put some money aside for that and other things. We have in my office, Joyce Davis generally works as our sort of service volunteer coordinator and works with Township Harrisburg, of course, as well. So
One
I
more
can keep
question.
taking questions. I don't mind, but
You have to ask a question.
I have a real quick, kind of small one.
We'll get to you too, Stacy.
I don't mind, but how about you have a question back?
Yeah, I was just curious if you could provide us with an update around the sinkhole situation that the city is facing. I know that with the Sinkhole Summit, it was some really great news came out of a lot of those residents hopefully being eligible for FEMA. I know they had put through their applications. Can you provide us an update on where that stands?
I would be happy to. I had this, I didn't have anything really, I have a list of like 10 topics here, and we got through 2. So, and sinkhole is right there. We had, we didn't get to the National Civil War Museum. We didn't get to bike lanes. That's probably the least popular thing I've ever done. Seriously, there's a whole anti-bike lane. So, transportation, two-way, city council, the National Civil War Museum. Well, we'll leave all that as sinkholes. So we did. If some of you have been following the news, we have an area of South Harrisburg that is prone to sinkholes, and we had a relatively large sinkhole develop on South 14th Street in the city of Harrisburg that has really jeopardized the homes along that street. And there are 52 homes. It's a street that is lined with middle-class homes on both sides of it. Lots of homeowners that have been there for years. And it's a really tragic situation, and it's going to cost millions of dollars to fix. And there is really no other fix other than relocating the homes, sort of turning the area into a park, and not rebuilding. I mean, you can, or you can spend a lot of money pumping, grouting into the ground and trying to fill the hole. But all of that is somewhat temporary because we're dealing with major geological shifts. So we actually had a sinkhole summit. This was an interesting strategy that we deployed in the city where we brought everybody together. We brought FEMA, the federal government together, the state government together. We brought our state representatives together. We brought the county, got everybody in one place. We had experts come in and talk to the city about what were sinkholes, and we had people from other communities talk about how they had dealt with sinkholes. And it was really positive. And one of the things that came out of that, with the help of our congressional delegation, is that FEMA basically said they would start making sinkholes eligible for pre-disaster mitigation relief, which has never happened before. And they sort of, federal government shifted policy based on and a desire to want to help Harrisburg. However, in order to get that, we need a match, which has to sort of be the local match. And we had looked at the county and some community development block grant disaster relief funding, which they had to be the local match. And basically, it's an election year in the county, and there are a lot of other projects that may be competing for that money, all of which are worthy, but could argue, and I would certainly argue that the sinkhole is the most acute problem in Dauphin County. But the commissioners have been reluctant to say it's going to go to the sinkhole versus these other projects, and that has sort of put the local match in jeopardy, which has then put the other money in jeopardy. We have FEMA in Pennsylvania saying that they're going to make this the priority for the state of, for the whole Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but we don't have Dauphin County saying they're going to make it the priority for the county. And that has caused a little bit of friction. So you will note that one of the things about government is that there are these interlapping layers, one of which is sort of county versus city, and that is the topic for a whole conversation at a future time. So, pretty good. Thank you very much.
Which you'll see on Facebook later.
Okay,
I hope you
I hope
like it.
so.
I'll tag
Yes.
you in it. And
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank
It
you
was
so
fun.
much.
I enjoyed it. I would be happy to follow up with any of you if you want to come visit City Hall and ask more questions in person.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for all that you do. All right.
Take care.
Wonderful.